What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Stocks by the Numbers, and I wanted to give a list real quick of 3 things that I'm keeping an eye on here going into Monday morning that are going to give me personally a little bit of a clearer picture on a few of the recommendations and symbols and callouts that we've been making here in the shorter term, especially in the Discord. First thing I'm looking at here is Exxon Mobil. Now, obviously, Exxon Mobil, these large oil companies, pretty much kind of move in line with the price of oil, which I also want to look at as well. One of my other 3 things to keep an eye on. But Exxon Mobil, as we see here, was in this very, very long-term ascending wedge here, basically coming out of the pandemic, as we see here. I went from the high, and then I went from the next low there in October, and as you see, long-term rising wedge that recently broke out. Now, if we track these trend lines as well on the tops and the bottoms, you can see that now this is basically forming a descending wedge, which only a matter of time is probably going to climb out and break out of. So looking at U.S. oil as well, I feel that it may go up just a little bit Monday and then potentially begin to pull back and sell off. So if everything goes according to plan, the call out that I made here in the Discord for a little bit of a short-term trade idea here is that Exxon Mobil is probably going to move up a little bit with the price of oil moving up a little bit, potentially Monday morning here at the open, and we can see a high of this trend line here of about 105.80 and change. Then, in my opinion, we could potentially reject and begin to drop down, as that's actually right around a pivot point. We'll look at stock charts in a second. And as we see here, the bottom of this trend line here, you're looking at 92, 91 and change. So that's why, in my opinion, I would definitely wait for confirmation. But if I do see a rise up here to the top trend line, and then it begins to reject, nice car going by, then it begins to reject and start to pull back, I would, in my opinion, I would probably jump into some puts on Exxon Mobil. Obviously, whatever you can afford, 95s if you have to go out of the money at 90, but obviously you're going to want to buy some time. Again, this is just a projection, but if it turns out to go this way, as you see here, bottom of the screen showing you August 28th, right? So you're going to need to buy at a minimum at least a couple of weeks, if not a month or 2 of time, right? Because you want this, again, to first reject and confirm that we're staying in this range, and then second of all, they could potentially keep it flat or not drop it immediately after you buy puts as much as you'd want them to, which is why I always say time trumps strike price, right? So a more conservative investor would want to buy maybe like 102s or like 100 puts, right? But you may have less liquidity. So what you're going to have to do is you want to buy time to ensure yourself that security, but also at the same time, you're going to have to go further out of the money to be able to afford it. Again, I'm speaking, of course, in terms of people who either take very, very small trades as to not risk a lot, or people who potentially don't have a lot of liquidity. If you're sitting there, with like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in your portfolio, obviously you and I know that what I just said really doesn't matter to you too much. But again, if you're a little bit tight, if you have a smaller account, if you're just starting out, you potentially don't have the confidence buying and selling and day trading and flipping and scalping these option trades, then again, you buy yourself a couple of weeks, potentially a month or 2. I mean, again, if this goes according to plan, as you see here, this could drop sub 90 potentially going into the last couple of months of the year. So just my opinion. But again, we do have to watch the price of oil, but I do feel that it may potentially work out exactly as I'm projecting here. If we switch over to stock charts here, and you can see that we made this high here back in early July, and then you can see we have lower highs and potentially lower highs. So as you see here, we have the 50-day moving average on the daily of 104.91 with the MACD potentially just about to cross to give us a little bit of an upside bump. And again, 105.88 is the next pivot point, which is going to tell us a lot more, which again is basically right around the top trend line of this current pattern that we're in. So that's why I have a feeling that we may potentially pop up to that level before we begin to pull back. But again, we're going to have to keep an eye on that level to see if we break up and potentially start to take a next leg higher, which in that case, obviously the puts really weren't going to work out. However, I do have a feeling that, again, you can see if you draw that trend line down, you can see that the stock may potentially hit like this high 105, maybe even very low 106 mark, and then potentially reject and pull back down into that triangle. So, again, only time will tell, waiting for a little bit of confirmation on that. But, again, like I always said, if I have any potential short-term trade ideas, anything that I feel is lining up, I'm going to let you guys know, and, that's exactly what I'm doing here. If we switch over to the weekly, you can see now we do have this tightening that has been taking place basically since the bull dropped on the weekly. But again, we showed that long-term rising wedge here that you can see over the years. But more importantly, you can see the 50-day moving average, 104.94, right? And if we switch back over to the daily, 50-day moving average, 104.91. And then, of course, we have that roughly 105.80 level. So that's why I'm saying right here with the stock at 103.89, you could potentially see maybe like 1 to 2 point move in the next day or so. And then we can see confirmation and see the rejection off the top trend line, which, of course, again, this is more of the risk-reward scenario. Because once again, to reiterate, we have to wait for confirmation that it's going to stay inside of this channel, right? This bottom and this top. So we have to make sure it's going to continue to bounce downwards inside of this channel. If we get that confirmation, what you're seeing here is that you could potentially see a $2 move up inside of Exxon Mobil. However, if it drops to the bottom of the range, now we're talking about, a 10 to 12 point drop towards the bottom. And of course, if you have a company like this with the stock a couple of points over $100 a share, and you buy more speculative out-of-the-money puts down at 92.5 or 90s with a little bit of time on it, and then the stock begins to start slipping 97, 95, 93, obviously you're going to start seeing some nice jumps in your puts, and you're going to make yourself potentially some nice short-term profits, maybe inside of the next 3 to 4 weeks here with some puts on Exxon Mobil. But I also wanted to move over to oil itself. Now, what you're seeing here is basically just a slew of trend lines here that I drew out. In my opinion, this does kind of help me. Of course, I know everyone has their own strategy. But, going from this top here, I basically just drew out to all the other tops that came out. And, of course, I drew up from the bottoms as well. But I wanted to show you guys, so this is like a one-year chart. And more importantly, if we zoom in here, you can see a lot of action taking place here as of late. So we're going back just a couple of days here. We're going back to about Wednesday. And in my opinion, it looks like we're kind of now forming this rising wedge here, but we have a lot of resistance points that we bounced off of and again had to retest here before potentially breaking higher. So if we zoom in, we'll go to the 1 month chart here. And if we zoom in, you can see that we're kind of in this channel. We're inside of this big diamond here, right? It's going back to about Tuesday the 11th. So if we stay in this channel, which we've been in for the last couple of days, you can see that we could potentially have a drop down here. You're looking at about maybe like 76.5, maybe like a 20-25 cent drop. And then hopefully it bounces off of that and begins to climb up to this next trend line here, as you see here, 77.57. So that's why I called it out in the Discord. In the immediate short term, right at the open, Monday morning, we could potentially see a little bit of a rise in oil. And if we see a rejection off of this trend line, we could potentially break down out of this wedge and pull back here minimum to this fib level of 76.11. So if you're involved into any of these oil situations that we took Friday before the close last week, in my opinion, again, if you see that rejection, you're going to have to potentially consider liquidating the trade, because we could really get ugly before we get better. And also, if you follow this trend line here, if it does happen to hit this 77.57, you can see that it's a descending resistance line here. So as you see here, the top 77.48, 77.38, right? So the next top is only going to be lower than this top. So if you see the rejection here, you may not potentially break out until we reach this apex of this diamond, which, as you see here, is going to be Friday, July 28th. So if you have a weekly trade lining up for this Friday now coming up, in my opinion, this is going to be the key level you have to keep an eye on for U.S. oil. And if it rejects, you have to liquidate, because, in my opinion, again, it will probably stay stagnant or not get back to that highs potentially till the end of the week before it has another breakout going higher. However, I want to move the, how do I do this? here we go, we move it like that, see, and as you see here, if we do potentially break above this level of 77.57, then we could now climb into this next diamond, going to this potential next high resistance level of 80.36 roughly. Now it would still be, a rising wedge, which would eventually have a break, which is why I have the circle and the red arrow going down here to back to this trend line here that we initially broke through. But again, only time is going to tell. Again, this is more of just a short-term trade idea. We really have to wait for confirmation at or above this level, which is why I also looked at Exxon Mobil, and it's very interesting as well. As we said, we have about like a point or two to move to the upside, and then we could potentially have a rejection and start pulling back to the downside. And if Exxon Mobil obviously follows oil, well, it's very coincidental that oil is basically lining up the same way, where we could, as we see here, look, you're going into Monday morning early, 6, 7, 8 a.m., right? So we're going to see now overnight whether we break, reject, or just stay right at this trend line, and then we're going to have to wait for confirmation to take it there. But very coincidental that oil and Exxon Mobil are basically lining up the same way, but only time is going to tell. So wanted you guys to keep an eye on Exxon Mobil. Again, that is a potential short-term trade idea in the next couple of weeks. I wanted to update you guys here on U.S. oil, which not only is tied to Exxon Mobil, obviously, but more importantly, all of the other oil drillers and refineries obviously kind of move with the price of oil, and that kind of gives us a more broader picture as well as to what we can potentially expect in the sector moving forward this week. The third thing I wanted to show you here was DXY, the dollar index. Right now, if we come down here, this was where in the Discord we spoke about this level right here, about 168, I believe it was. And then, oh, wait a minute, let me readjust. Yeah, so it was this level right here that we needed the dollar to hold. As you see, we're going back to Wednesday, July 12th. I know I didn't make a video on this in the last couple of weeks. We were just going back and forth, having a little discussion about this in Discord. Again, a personal Discord thrown up for all you guys. It's in the description. If you'd like to join, no problem. Come in. We talk about stocks. We talk about the weather. I don't care. But this was the level that the DXY, or the dollar, had to hold. And as you see here on this big drop down, that is when Wednesday, July 10th, that morning, that is when it broke down and began to drop into these lows here of about 99.57. As you see here, 99578, that was the new low. But here, as it broke and went down, I know, I didn't make another video on this. I have a lot going on. It's very hard for me to be like these other schmoes on YouTube who are just able to, pump out 10, 12 videos a day. Most of the time it's useless information that really doesn't even warrant your attention. They're doing it for themselves and their channel, not necessarily for you, which is why I always said I would not overpollute and over-dilute my channel with these useless videos and these useless updates. If I don't have something to say, if I really have no conviction and no idea what's going on, I'm not going to make a video just to make a video to grow my own channel for my own interests, right? Because your time is more important than that, because we know that time is money, so we can't afford to waste it. And right here, as we had the break here below this trend line on the DXY, that is when we called out calls on GLD and SLV, which of course are the gold and silver ETFs respectively. And obviously the price of silver and the price of gold were going up as the value of the dollar went down. So this is why we've kind of recently been keeping an eye on this DXY indicator, right? Because depending on whether the dollar is going to go up or down is going to dictate whether or not commodity prices are going to go up and down. And of course, gold and silver is going to move in basically that opposite direction, because the weaker the dollar is, obviously, the more commodities are worth and the more valuable metals like gold and silver become. So we made a couple of bucks here on the calls on the SLVs and the GLDs and the miners as well, all those other symbols. And now you can see that we may have potentially found our bottom and began to start bouncing and rising here, going back to, Tuesday, July 18th. Now, I drew out again another bunch of trend lines here, and you can see that we are in this uptrend. However, we are beginning to have this tightening here. And right here is where it all began, in my opinion. And the high here on this candle is 101,215. And you can see I drew that trend line across and threw out a price label there, because in my opinion, that is going to dictate whether the dollar breaks out and goes now to this next trend line, which we're looking at about 101.80, or we could potentially reject, break out of this potentially rising wedge, and begin to drop down potentially back in this rising wedge channel that we were in before climbing and taking another leg higher. So if we do break down here and reject, you can see about 970, excuse me, 109.70. But of course, if we potentially break down and pull back to this initial trend line that we were looking at, we're going back to about 170. So again, only time is going to tell, but this is why I'm kind of bringing all these to you, because they're all basically kind of intertwined and interconnected. And again, we did take a couple of positions on a few of these back Thursday, Friday, last week in the Discord. So I wanted to give an update to those people in the Discord, but of course to you subscribers watching as well who potentially haven't made their way in the Discord, because this kind of dictates, again, where a lot of other stocks may begin to rally or may begin to reject, whether or not the value of the dollar increases or decreases in the short term, the price of oil increases or decreases. So there are a lot of plays and trades and investments that you can take just off of these couple of symbols and these couple of indexes here. So that's why I really wanted to do the video. But again, we are potentially rising, and we could hit this level and have a little bit of a rejection. However, since breaking down, you can see we kind of also, let me change this up a little bit. Where is my, here we go. Right? So we could potentially have something like this going on, right, with our potential cup, and we could get back to that level and just begin to consolidate and form our handle coming back down to this trend line and then break out and take another leg higher, right? So obviously we have to wait for confirmation on that one as well, but this is why, again, if I have any short-term trade ideas or any potential trend lines, resistance points, support levels that you guys should be keeping an eye on, you know, I'll try to make a quick video or just update you guys in the Discord if I can. But those are basically the three things that I wanted you guys to keep an eye on going into the open here tomorrow, Monday morning. And that's why I kind of made this one midday, so hopefully you guys can enjoy this one during your afternoon or later in your evening. You can catch this video and you can have just even a small watch list of a couple of things to look for going into Monday morning at the open, and even potentially later on in the rest of the week, moving into Tuesday and Wednesday. So just wanted to do a quick update. So we're keeping an eye on DXY, the dollar index. We're keeping an eye on Exxon Mobil. Again, in our range, potentially setting up some nice puts down the road here over the next couple of weeks or even next couple of months that can make us some handsome returns here. And of course, we are keeping an eye, and of course, we are keeping an eye on the price of oil right now, 76.77. Looking for this level here again, 77.57, with a potential rejection or a potential breakout to 80 plus on oil. So I'm going to end it there. Once again, this is Stocks by the Numbers. I want to thank you guys for stopping by. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop them down in the comments section. I'm usually very quick to reply. Like the video, thumbs up, algorithm, helps me get more eyes on the channel. More importantly, our handshake agreement. Please push the subscribe button. That is all I ask from you. If you're going to watch the content, enjoy the content, potentially take some of these trades and recommendations that I'm bringing to the table, all I ask, handshake agreement. Subscribe to the channel. That is how you help me help you. But more importantly, like I always say, I understand that markets are very rocky and they're very volatile and they're very uncertain. So I do want to wish all of you success. I hope you all had a great weekend, you and your families. I hope everyone makes a couple of dollars here moving forward these next couple of weeks and the last 5-6 months here of the year. Let's close out 2023 with a bang. Let's finish green. Let's finish positive. And let's stay disciplined and let's stay focused, right? And I'll end it there. Enjoy your weekend. Have a good day.